I think we have all had this experience where we whip out our phone to take a picture of a stunning sunset scene, but it feels like the picture doesn't do it justice. It looks kind of dull and lifeless, and we feel disappointed. Today, I want to teach you how to create a painting that's the opposite of that. A tutorial on how to create a landscape painting that's rich in depth and full of liveliness. Here is the reference photo I will be using today. Although it may seem complicated at first glance, I will guide you through the process of simplifying it. Here I'm making a sketch of the landscape using pencil. Some artists prefer to do that by using some lighter tones of acrylic paint that won't be appearing later on, but I really do prefer using a pencil. Before even sketching, it's important to have a clear idea of the composition. In my case, I have chosen a focal point which is the most distant mountain peak, going to be. This means that all the objects in the painting should be arranged in a way that directs the viewer's eye towards the focal points. I begin by blocking in the colors, establishing a peak structure and form, starting with the background. As you can see, I have also designed the sky with the focal point in mind, which I spoke about earlier. I start by working on the darker areas of the sky to get a good understanding how the different blues look next to each other. Next, I move to blocking in the middle ground of the painting, focusing once again on the shadow parts. To make identifying the shadow parts easier, it's important to have a clear understanding of the direction of the light source. In this painting, the light source is shining from the back of the mountain on the right. Knowing the direction of the light source makes the painting process easier and helps to create a more confident-looking final painting. To showcase the shadows in the distance, cool tones are a great choice, and I personally like to use a mix of ultramarine blue and lighter colors for this purpose. Once I have blocked in the middle ground and also the foreground, including the lake between them, I move back to working on the background. This process of working from back to front and starting from the darks is repeated, but this time with a greater focus on detail. I aim to create a subtle transition by giving the left side of the sky a purple hue, while the right side is more blue. If the sky above the mountains includes more purple, I ensure that this color is also reflected on the mountains below. I use the leftover color to cover these mountains and create a sense of harmony throughout the painting. To create an aesthetically pleasing color composition, I think it's much better to spread warm colors evenly throughout the painting instead of concentrating them in one corner. By doing so, a more balanced appearance can be achieved. For instance, the purple hues in the upper left corner can add warmth to the artwork, while the red mountain on the right can complement it. The technique I'm using involves gradually adding brighter and brighter colors to the highlight areas with each layer of paint. However, since I'm still in the initial stages of the painting, I need to be cautious to not make any area too bright yet. But if I were to add the highlights first, it would be pretty challenging to include the shadows later on. This is why it's important to start working on the shadows first. By gradually building up the shadows, I can then add lighter colors to create strong highlights that give a high contrast look, making the painting appear more realistic and three-dimensional. This technique is particularly important for paintings with a darker tone, as it ensures that the highlights stand out and add a visual interest to the piece. After I have established the background, I move on to creating a new layer for the sky, which will consist of pink clouds. Initially, I wasn't sure how saturated I wanted the pink to be, so I started with a highly saturated version. However, I soon realized that the color was too intense and overwhelming, so I decided to tone it down with a softer shade of pink. As I continued painting the clouds, I also realized that in order to achieve the soft light effect I was going for, I needed to adjust the tone of the sky behind the clouds. So I painted the sky with a lighter tone to match pink clouds. Throughout the process, I kept making adjustments to the pink color, adding new layers of paint each time I felt the previous version was too saturated. Once I felt somewhat satisfied with the pink clouds, I shifted my focus to the middle ground and foreground. Here I add details to the forest area, refining the shapes of the distant trees. While working on these three sections, I realized that if I wanted the pink sky to truly stand out, I need to create more contrast in the foreground. This means making the darker areas even darker. To achieve this, I increased the darkness in the left upper corner of the painting, creating a massive dark cloud. My overall goal is to balance the lighter tones of the pink sky with the darker areas in the foreground in order to create a greater sense of depth and contrast in the painting. So I continue working on the lake. My focus is on leading my brushstrokes towards the painting's focal point, which would help guide the viewer's eye towards the area of interest. The next step in my painting process involves working on the trees in the foreground. Since my goal is to create a sense of depth, I plan to use highly saturated and warm colors in this area and add more detail than in other parts of the painting. However, I must be cautious not to make the foreground too detailed, as this might draw attention away from the painting's focal point, which is in the sky. I'm currently focusing primarily on the contrast levels in the foreground. I'm using warm colors that gradually become cooler as they move towards the distance, which helps to create a more realistic sense of depth in the painting. As the colors transition from warm to cool, I'm also decreasing the color saturation, contrast levels, and level of detail. It's another day but the same video, so yeah, let's continue the tutorial. I have found that my paintings typically turn out best when the sky is the brightest part of the image. Of course, it depends on the scene being painted, but for a sunset or sunrise like this one in my current painting, the majority of the brightness should be focused on the sky. For this reason, I have been revisiting the foreground and middle ground of the painting, gradually making it darker to create that contrast and enhance the brightness of the sky. I must admit that this scene has been quite challenging to paint. I realized how easy it is to make the colors look unnatural or overdone. After all, this type of landscape is not something that one typically encounters every day. I found this process of painting this landscape to be challenging, but that only increased my engagement, meaning that the difficulty of the task prevented me from becoming bored. Currently, I'm satisfied with the color composition in my painting, and I'm working to achieve a more seamless transition in the sky. Blending acrylic paint for sure can be difficult, so I have been adding new layers of paint to the sky using a slightly damp brush to gently blend and soften the edges. As I approach the final stages of this painting, my focus has shifted to adding details. However, my approach to painting these details is quite disorganized. Typically, when I come across an area in the painting that lacks detail in comparison to other parts, I tend to focus on that particular spot. After finishing that area, I move on to another part where I feel additional detail is necessary, and so on. Currently, I'm placing my attention on creating smooth white paths along the lower section of the mountains. This technique produces a hazy effect, enabling the viewer to perceive how the mountains gradually fade into the distance. This, in turn, gives a greater sense of depth to the painting and, enhances the realism of the landscape. While I previously aimed to avoid overly saturated pink colors, I have now decided to add some more vivid clouds in the distance from the focal point of the sunset. Returning to the area around my focal point, it is now time to concentrate on adding the brightest highlights. As I previously mentioned, I had planned to reserve this task for the final stage of the painting, and I can now say that it was worth waiting. As I approach the end of the painting process, I revisit the sky to address any areas that still require some refinement. Although I aim to achieve a smooth transition between colors, I'm not trying to replicate the exact smoothness of the reference photo. Instead, I want to maintain a certain artistic style and keep the painting unique. Also, here I'm adding some final touches with white and then calling it a day. Thank you for watching, I really appreciate it. It's my first ever painting tutorial, so any feedback I would love to hear. And yeah, that's it. See you later.